Visionary Minds Public Relations and Media is a proud sponsor of CA Media Podcast. Be sure to get all your publicity, digital marketing, writing, media consulting services by emailing visionarymindsny@gmail.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the CA Media Podcast, the show that allows you to come in your own unique way. This podcast will be about my journey throughout my adult life. I will bring my friends, and there will be some episode in which I will be alone to speak about what's on my mind. Topics will range from society, culture, sports, relationships, and so much more. There's nothing off limits on the CA Media Podcast. So, as you come into my world to listen to my podcast, feel free to know that this is a safe space and a personal space to bring your family and friends to listen to the CA Media Podcast. So come and join this ride with me, and as always, this is the show that allows you to come in your most unique, authentic way. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the CA Media Podcast, the show that allows you to come in your own unique way. I am the host, Clyde Anderson, and today episode is about keeping our roots alive, a conversation with family historian Spencer McCall. The show is brought to you by Visionary Minds Public Relations and Media. If you have any media consultations or inquiries, please contact Tammy Reese at visionarymindsny@gmail.com, and she would gladly get in contact with you. So today I have my cousin Spencer McCall. He's taken a special role and become our family's historian, documenting, preserving, and sharing stories that connect us all. We are doing a deep dive on why he felt called to do this and why he discovered along the way why keeping family history alive is so important. Spencer, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm great, cousin. Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing amazing, amazing. Would you want me to read your bio, or you want to just talk a little bit about
It's
yourself?
up to you. You can tell it. I mean, it's up to you. Or
Yeah, I could dive in. Spencer McCall Jr. bio is a renowned historian and genealogist specializing in the history of North Carolina with particular expertise in the Piedmont region. He has written extensively on the state's past, authoring books and articles that explore family lineage, community development, and cultural heritage. His presentations, delivered both in person and online, have reached audience nationwide, where he is admired for his ability to bring archival research and genealogical records to life through storytelling. Professionally, McCall serves as executive director, a role that reflects his commitment to leadership, organization development, and community impact. His work in this capacity mirrors his passion for history, connecting people, preserving legacies, and building bridges between the past and the future. In addition to his professional and scholarly endeavors, McCall serves on numerous historical and civic boards where his expertise guides preservation efforts, strengthens civic institutions, and promotes educational initiatives. Dedication has made him a respected voice in both historical and community leadership circles. McCall's own family heritage in North Carolina and Virginia dates back to the 1650s, giving him a deeply personal connection to the stories he uncovers. This lineage, rooted in generations of resilience and community building, inspires his mission to preserve and shares the history of the Piedmont and beyond. Today, Spencer McCall Jr. is recognized not only as a historian or a genealogist, but also a steward of tradition, a civic leader, and a trusted voice in preserving North Carolina's past and future generations. Spencer, it's a pleasure. Again, amazing bio.
thank you. The pleasure is mine.
So, what inspired you today, or in general, to allow you to take on the role of like a family historian?
So, of course, we are cousins, and part of that first impetus involves your family directly. So we had a reunion. I was a little kid in my hometown in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, And so I was like 5 years old, and it was downtown, a very nice location, and your family came down from New York. And so up to that point, I knew my family very, very well, my first cousins at least, and my grandparents and aunts and uncles. But I was amazed to see we had all these relatives from New York and Connecticut and South Carolina. And then I remember there were all these Roberts. I remember, Robert, your
Hmm.
uncle, grandfather Robert.
Yep.
There was three, like, there's three Roberts here. I was like, wow, we got three
Yeah.
Roberts.
Right.
And so I was inspired. And my father was a big believer in making sure that we were educated in Black history. And so he and I would watch Roots since I was 4 or 5 years old. And I remember at that point having gone back and watched with that him, and I was amazed. And so I remember asking his mother, "Do you know my daddy's 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 daddy's, and my mama's mama, meaning her, and also with my grandmother, my mom's mom?" And they told me as best as they could. And so then of I was just amazed by that history and that connection and how we had all these relatives. And so in seventh grade, I came to New York City with my middle school,
Hmm.
and I knew I had cousins in New York, but I didn't know y'all's last names because I was a
Right.
young kid. I mean, I knew I had cousins there, and I can remember being in the hotel looking, saying that thick New York phone book, which ours was small,
Hmm.
saying, "Can I somehow, will I just see a name that makes sense to me and call them and say I'm in town?" And we went to see the Statue of Liberty. And I remember going up, that Kodak Film had this kiosk where you would put your last name in, and a picture would pop up, and they would say, "Your family came over on this ship in Ellis Island."
Oh wow.
And I remember standing there in middle school, seeing the pictures ahead, and I realized, but the people that pop up won't look like me. And I was kind of embarrassed.
Mhm.
And I said, because they're going to think I'm stupid. They're going to think I believe those white people are my ancestors. Now, of course, I mean, I know I do have white ancestors. I'm just
Correct.
saying, but this is the mind of a seventh grader.
At the time.
I said, at the time, I said, they're going to think this little black boy thinks that person on this ship from Ellis Island is his ancestor. And so I got out of line. I didn't want to be embarrassed to have these people, because you were thinking in middle school everyone's watching you, and of course they wouldn't have been out there at all.
Right.
But in middle school, you're thinking that. So I got out of line and I said, I'm going to make sure I find out who my folks are. And so from that pursuit, I began my research of starting in middle school, but really in high school.
Hmm.
And then with the day I got my license, we had a cousin named Doris who loved our family deeply. And so she said one day, we're going to go to New York and see our cousins up there. And I got in the car, the van with your great aunt Eva, and we drove to New York through the night. And I
Hmm.
remember I interviewed your great great grandma, Aunt Gracie, who's 100 years old, about the family history also. And so that
Hmm.
was kind of how I got started on that side of the family. My mom's family is a little bit different. I remember I was with them all the time, cousins, galore. But I
Hmm.
remember at our church, people there, you would see the black church on TV, and they're
Correct.
shouting and carrying on.
Yeah, correct.
They didn't do that at her church. They were very proper, so to speak, and they were, very different, more conservative. And so I said, why is it? I asked the question, why is it that my mom's church, where I'm raised at, or our church, the people here speak differently than if you go across town in Winston-Salem? And so as I began to delve into that, I realized that my mother's church, or our church, which is First Walltown, had come out of St. Philip Moravian Church, which is my background. It's called Old Salem in Winston-Salem, and they're Moravians. And so the
Mm.
Moravians were German, kind of like Lutherans. And they did establish the oldest black church that still exists in North Carolina for black. It's called St. Philip's. And so after freedom, my mother's church was really an outgrowth, although they're Baptist, of that church. And the people that went there had been in North Carolina or Virginia for a long time, whereas most people that are black that came to my city came from South Carolina.
Correct.
And so with them, they brought more of that South Carolina way of worship, which is more traditional in how we see black worship. And so asking all those questions of why I wanted to know is what led me to do my research. And that's how I got into it.
Mm. So, was there like a moment, like when you was a young adult, that sparked like this interest of preserving the history? So, like we know, like ancestry just I don't know how recent ancestry is. It's probably several decades. How were you able to like store like all the knowledge that you gained from a teenager to a young adult, besides your brain? How did you store that information?
Okay, good. So what I started doing was I went to the library. I got my license at age 16, and the first place I went was the North Carolina room in our library because that's a room on history of our area.
Correct.
And I'd been online. I knew I had these programs about how to store genealogy, and I had those. And so I began to store things on computers and also files. I would copy and save any obituary I could find, marriage things, news articles, anything I got, like even the Kraus Jordans. I have some of y'all's old papers, flyers,
Mm.
everything. And then I went to see my cousin Doris and said, let's go to South Carolina. I turned 16. I said, I want to know the family history. And so she said, well, you really do? And so we drove to Cheraw and we saw your great aunt Eva, and she shared what she had, what she knew. And then other cousins shared what they knew. And people said, you got more cousins here. So from that emphasis, I would get names and numbers. And then I had learned in ninth grade, my summer of ninth grade, that you could go online, not online, you can go online now, but every 10 years, the government does something called a census report, where they
Correct.
record everybody's households. And so I went and looked in those during my summer at Wake Forest University as a high school kid. I was on campus, and I saw that you could go and see who was born in 1870, who was living in 1880, 1900, and 1920. And I would look back and find people that we knew. I was like, wow, that's my great
Hmm.
grandfather. Or that's your great great grand, and I would see those people there and I would build it out and share those with people, and they were amazed, and they did have more and more stories. And so from there, I was sorted like in computers and file folders. I did some little booklets, and then I later would do actual books.
Was anyone surprised that you decided to take this on as a role that you wanted to preserve the family's history?
I think they were in a good way because usually people think of historians as being people that are older.
Hmm.
And so when they would see that I was young, they were always willing to share. And they also were always open to share. People would say, they won't talk to me, and I would just go and talk to them, and they'd always talk. And so I think they were either amazed or had some kind of level of trust in me. I
Correct.
think one of the things that people have to realize if you're going to do this work is there is truth, but there are some things you have to understand too. There's humanity. And so I say that like if you're a personal believer of Christ, Christ talks
Correct.
about how do we deliver information. So for example, if I know that somebody's father isn't really their father, what's that going to do for me to tell them that? To me, they're still my cousin,
Correct.
regardless. So is that going to make them feel so bad they're going to be depressed? If so, that's probably not, I probably shouldn't do that unless they ask me out point and say, what do you know? So is how do you curate information, but yet not tell a lie? And then how do you share that? And you have this information, but what do you do with it? And so you have to tell our story. I feel like we would be very stupid and foolish to allow others to tell our story.
Correct.
He who tells a story is the winner. History is his story. And so we have to dictate and show who we are because others are going to tell who they are, and we should tell who we are too.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Our DNAs never lie about who we are, so, you know, one may tell you, all right, you was born on this date, XYZ. Another person may say, oh, you was born this day. But you could always go back, if you, like you said, if you do your research and you know the truth, you can find out that information, for yourself. And then you could properly, reflect that information to someone that maybe gave you the wrong information. So I think I'm grateful that currently the internet, it's a great source of information, especially in the last 25 years. Um, because before, like in the 2000s, we had dial-up. So, and dial-up wasn't all that. But so now that all of our information is public record, um, what's like the most surprising discovery in all of your research so far that you have done?
Okay. So I'll give several examples. So in one of our families together as collective is I remember seeing the movie Glory, and I always was amazed that there were these black men who were enslaved who then fought for their freedom and the freedom of others. And so I did not realize how many USCT soldiers there were. And then I realized that actually our ancestors were a part of that movement. They fought in that war. And then I saw how our ancestors collectively, before that in 1867 in South Carolina, because I do have roots in South Carolina too, as do you, that in the governor of South Carolina, who was then Republican, which was then, we would consider Democrat now, the party's changed. He allowed the people there to arm, the men there to arm themselves to defend them against what we would now call the KKK. And so you can go and find that these black men in 1867 in South Carolina, with also whites too, defended themselves like they've been armed in a militia to defend them and their communities against the KKK or people that would be like the KKK. And so we don't always hear that these people, these men, were strong men who believed in protecting and defending their families. Also finding USCT soldiers. And then you look at it and you say, it was 1866 or 67, or they were freed in 1865, and seeing that these people owned land by 1870, that is amazing. How do you buy land? I mean, it's hard for people now, even with bank loans and all these grant programs to buy houses, but yet these men and women who had come from slavery with nothing, like literally you're told you're free, but you have nothing. So most were forced to be sharecroppers. But yet some found a way to buy property. And our family did do that. And that is amazing to have that. And you ask, that's who we are. We're survivors, but we're also thrivers and we're
Correct.
builders. And that they then saw the need for churches and schools. So you're free and you don't have a lot, but you will give enough money to build your own schools. So there's this paradigm in our communities now that we really don't prioritize education. And we'll tell people that, it's okay because, we don't have to do all that learning. But our ancestors did prioritize learning to the point that they actually paid for their own schools. And I couldn't imagine with all the wealth we have right now, having to pay for our own school. Can you imagine having to raise the money for a school and then pay the teachers and buy the supplies? And yet people are complaining because to buy their kids crayons and notebooks. So, and they had nothing. There was no bank
Right.
loan.
There was nothing.
There was nothing, but they were finding enough money to do that and to build their churches. So that's their priority. And then thirdly, we know after freedom that the paper would say the Negroes are just walking around the streets, being lazy. They're just going from Bennettsville to Chirwall, just walking around for nothing, from New York to Memphis, Tennessee. No, they were looking for their families. So families had been sold off, mother, father, sister, brother,
Correct.
slavery, and they're walking to find their relatives. One of our lines in North Carolina, Virginia, the Harrisons, it's documented that after freedom, some of those from Virginia and North Carolina walked to Mississippi. Now, I can't imagine driving, I used to though, without GPS. They were walking, they couldn't even read, to Mississippi to find their relatives. And many of us won't get on a plane to see our brother.
Because we're afraid.
We're afraid. And so they walk to Mississippi to see their relatives. And then they get down there and say, wait, man, this Mississippi is hell. Hell on earth. No. We're going to go back to North Carolina. And they then walk back to North Carolina and Virginia. And yet, for me, when you call me and say, come to the reunion, cousin, I'm like, well, I don't know. That's going to cost me $100. And I don't want to miss my frat meeting on Saturday. And my girl having, that's the reality. But these people valued family, education, and church.
It's insane that you say that because like I can't imagine like myself walking. It had to be like 40, 50 days if you walk from like let's say Mississippi to like North or South Carolina and not know where you're going. Like how do
Where
you
you
know
going?
that you're in North Carolina back
They
in those
got
days?
lost and ended up in Florida. Had to walk from Florida to back up to Mississippi. So yeah, I just couldn't imagine. And so when I tell those stories I share those stories for two reasons. During COVID, we had to remind ourselves and remind others that this is our country. We built this country. We're part of this country. And others should know that we are a patriotic people. But I wanted my own to know that. So that kid is being told that he can't learn or she can't learn, or you're a slow learner, or you shouldn't. We don't do this. We're Black. No. My people are people who have education. My people are people who own things. My people are people that build churches. This is who we are. It's me. And if they can do that, I can do that. That's why I tell the stories and share these stories. And I'm not getting political, but there's a big movement now, and I love Juneteenth. But we say, well, July 4th isn't our holiday. If you read the papers, you'll find out that up until around 1920 or 30, July 4th was a black holiday in the
Mm.
South. We were the ones who celebrated that because we were saying, hey, we are now free from slavery. But we lose some of our history and give to others freely without knowing the true story.
Mm. So how how do you go about gathering like stories from people that's much older than us now and like and record these documents and get these photos? Like, how do you do it now? It says
I
like a
think you
lot of
start, the key is you start now. And one of the big things is they're going to see things differently than we do.
Mhm.
And so, what do I mean by that? I would go to Chirag, and we have a common people that you know. And I
Yeah,
would say, "Do you have any problems when you were a kid with racism?" No, we got along with our neighbors, which is true. And you're sitting
correct.
there saying, but I just saw there was a Klan burning right there beside your house on the paper. You never doubt what they're saying. You don't say, you sound crazy. You just listen and you don't judge. And you have to be open to say, let me see history through their lens and not with my lens. And
Right.
so, yes, and that way, because when you judge people, they then want to tell you less. And so you always want to give them the comfort, make them comfortable enough to tell you everything
Hmm.
and say, I'm not going to judge you. And you also have to understand that even if whatever your paradigm is about race, if you truly want to know your ancestry, it's going to cross paths with people that are Caucasian and Native American, and everybody else, and so you got to get their viewpoint too.
That's
And
right.
because you learn more about our history by tracking. Most Black families cannot trace their families before easily, not easily, before 1870. And so that means when they're enslaved, you've got to follow the enslaver's family. So oftentimes, people that have done a good job of finding their relatives during enslavement, they may know more about the white families than their white descendants do, because I got to track them to also find my own people. And it's very true about us. You also
Hmm.
have roots in Ellerbe, North Carolina, and the Ellerbe ties to Chirwell too. And the Ellerbes were one of the largest slave owning plantation families in that part of the state, those both states. And so you have to know about them to know where our people were at that time frame.
Have you faced any challenges and like or like missing records or like
Yes.
heard of like family myths?
Yes. So one of the biggest myths, and this is going to make a lot of people mad, but it's a true myth. We like to say everybody is Indian or Native American. The reality is, and if you look at the timelines, by 18, so like for example, where I'm looking right now is in Salem. There would have been Black people who were here as of the 1780s. By the time they got here, the people who were what we call Indians had
Hmm.
been run out of the area. They were run out of the area. So what's the likelihood of a person who was enslaved to have access to procreate with an Indian person when there's none around? They're 100 miles to the west of us. As of the time you hear, it's not very likely. The sad thing is when kids would ask 30, 40, 50 years ago and say, Grandma, why does cousin so and so look like that and I look like this? They didn't want to say, well, maybe the enslavers took my grandma and had sex with her against her will, or maybe they thought they were a couple. I'm not going to judge that
Correct.
either.
Correct.
Or my daddy couldn't defend my mom, and so although we were free, we were not just sharecroppers, but when they call him Master Steele, when Mr. Jim came steal and wanted to see mama, they had to let him see mama, and that's
Hmm.
why. So what they would say was we're Indian, when in reality it was more so Caucasian and Black. We were mixed. And so that's one of those biggest myths we will oftentimes find of when we're doing the research, the timelines don't add up and the DNA doesn't add up. That's just the reality of most of the Indian tribes. Now, there were a few were not even what we would call pro-Black anyway. So they weren't going to just save you. I'm not saying they were bad, just
Correct.
they took they took on the customs of their white neighbors. The Cherokee enslaved some of their people. Now, of course, they bought slaves. Now, of course, they would have a chance to intermingle and procreate. The Seminoles, however, in Florida, were pro-Black, and so there are these, and that's for a long time. This involves our family. Spain was in Florida, and slavery among Spaniards was different than slavery among the English people. The English were much more brutal than the Spanish were. And so Spain owned Florida and south of there. And so to kind of give the English a hard time, they made it known that if enslaved people left South Carolina or Georgia or wherever and came to Florida, they'd be free. And so literally in Jacksonville, Florida, or St. Augustine, Florida, slaves from South Carolina and Georgia rushed to Florida, and they were helped by the. And so there you had Seminoles, Spanish people, and formerly enslaved people who are now free blacks living together in community at that time. That made the English, the white people in Georgia, mad because their slaves are running away.
Correct.
So they
And
then
being
said,
free.
they're free. And so they sent the militia in from Georgia and South Carolina to go and get their slaves. The slaves and the Seminoles fought back and won. And so they said, well, if we can't get some black slaves, African slaves, we'll enslave some of the Seminoles. And they did do that. And so as this went on, those people who were black said, we got to leave here. When England, when of course the US bought Florida. And so we know they took canoes and took shipped in canoes, black folks, and went to what is now the DR in Haiti and Cuba.
Wow.
And so you will see this. And then we say, well, we sometimes been forced to think of Latinos as being other people. They're distant. But when you do the math, we know that only 6% of the Africans that came to what is now the Americas came to what is now the US. The other 94% of those African slaves went to the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, what is now Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, what is now Haiti, those islands in the Caribbean and South America and Mexico. So when you see people in those countries that do look like us, that's why. So in reality, you might have a brother that was sent to Haiti, and one goes to South Carolina, one's in Florida. And now we're all those people's descendants. So when you look at those people from Puerto Rico, the DR, Trinidad, Mexico, Brazil, those probably are your cousins, and you're really your close cousins. Through DNA, we're finding close cousins even now in those places.
Correct. Have you uncovered stories that changed your perspective on you or our family?
Yes, many of those. So one I'll tie to what we just discussed. I was in South Carolina. I was a cousin of ours who was a cousin of ours who was raised in Chirral, who was in New York, and she told the story that her grandfather would sit on the stump outside his cabin in Chirral and put his head in his hand and cry about how he came over on a ship with his mama. And I was like, sure he did. No, I ain't tell her that.
Correct.
But then I go to the census records and what do I see? That our family actually reported that when they were born, they were living in 1870 and 1880 in South Carolina, but they reported that they and their parents were born in Florida. And that lines up with the time of this whole difference and changing of Spanish Florida becoming American, bought by the US. And how would they come to South Carolina but by a boat? And she literally said, I don't think they were come from Africa. I think they came from the islands of Florida. She knew what she was talking about. And then I knew there were some blacks who were doing slavery. They were not enslaved. There were some who were free. I had no idea that I came from a lot of free black people. They were free before slavery, and that they owned businesses, and they've been willed land to each other since the 1600s, and going on, we own land in North Carolina as of the 1790s. I mean, I had no idea. My free folks, I didn't know I even had free relatives. People were free before slavery ended.
So going back to tradition, what kind of traditions should families continue to or should pass down to their newer generation?
I think one is we have to be relevant to the current times. And so, although I love family reunions, we have to say, okay, is the family reunion of 1925 that we've been doing since 1925, is that the same way to do it? Or do we become more savvy and let our young people design reunions that meet the needs of everyone that are away that can do that? So for example, if we do meet in South Carolina on Uncle Ben's farm where there's no hotels and it's hot and there's mosquitoes flying around, can we also do a virtual option for people to join in? I think we have to pass down traditions that are family. Every family is different, understanding that. But what kind of things are going to really hone in on my family? And then we know that there's a guy named Campbell, Joseph Campbell, and he discusses the power of the myth. And what that says is in every culture, there's a myth of how we became about. And it defines, and people believe that. In America, we believe that we fought against the bad English, and
Hmm.
therefore it's who we are. So what he says is we have to make sure our cultures have a myth, which is a story
Correct.
of how we came about. And you pass that story down to every generation, knowing that whatever you pass down, that's what they're going to become. And so we have to change the paradigm of our ancestors were enslaved and they were in chains and they were just beat down and they were stolen in Africa and they had to get on this nasty ship. We say our ancestors had a life in Africa. They were kidnapped and they were stolen. They were put on a nasty ship with feces falling on their faces, and yet they survived. They got to this country and they brought with them the knowledge to raise rice if they were in South Carolina, Louisiana.
Correct.
And because
Hmm.
of that, they did that. And even though they were in chains, and even though they knew their life could be changed any moment, they were survivors and they were learning things. So whenever they became free and they had no idea when it was coming, they could do their own. And even though they had been beat down and traumatized and abused, when freedom finally came, because we come from they're survivors, they took what they had saw and they worked together and they made something from nothing. And you show how they owned property, they built businesses, and they stuck together. And they were a proud people that wanted their future to have a great future. And so that goes against the paradigm of we are bitches and whores, twerking our bodies and being crazy, don't know how to do anything. And we're
Correct.
telling us who we are. And then in the moment of that, you find out what is something I can show my family that this is what we do. If we are covenanters and we can sing, we're going to
Hmm.
sing together. We're going to get
Exactly.
together and have a singing and a dinner. We cook good food. But whatever that is that your family has, that's what you have to pass down.
I like how you described that. You gave us a small sample of a situation where, yeah, it's short of a family history, but it was like crying and complaining, and then you gave a different aspect of that same family history, but you expanded it so that our future generation won't think, all right, we just was whining, moaning, bitching, complaining about how we
Yes,
got
yes.
here. But now there's a story behind it, and there's a survival behind it, and how we flourish through our pain. So I appreciate that. That means a lot. So a
Thank
couple
you.
more questions. Why do you believe it's important for families to have a historian?
I think it's important because we have to know where we came from. If we don't know where we came from, we're actually doomed to the past, to repeat the past.
Correct.
And I don't care about politics. Of my mother used to say to me all the time. She would say, people would say, "Well, shouldn't they teach the Bibles in schools?" She says, "I don't depend upon the church, the schools, to teach my kids about the Bible. That's my
Hmm.
job." And so we have to teach our people our history. It is not. I'm not looking for the schools to teach our history.
Of
They
course not.
can,
You can.
but that's not me to worry about. It's my job to make sure we know who we are and to know our history. And you will find out that young people really take pride in knowing who they are
Yeah, more now,
and
more
their
today
history.
than like in the
Yeah.
past, because like I said earlier, everything's accessible for us. Everything is accessible for us to research, to look up, to ask questions, to take DNA tests, or do a DNA diagnostic, or do an ancestry kit. You know?
Yes, it is. It's all there. It's all there. So we have to steer that ship. We don't depend upon the government. We steer the ship. Be it your church, your community, or whatever. You steer the ship of what your kids learn about history and themselves.
All right, two more questions, and then we'll do
Oh,
like a
you're
rapid
fine. No,
fire.
ask away. Ask away.
How would someone, or how would you help future generations how would you hope future generation will benefit from the work that you have done?
How I hope they do. So what I saw is I noticed that when we would do these family locally, dinners or whatever, I was that boring cousin who had the levity from their parents to say,
Mm-hmm.
"Here's your part in the program. We're gonna do programs."
Mm-hmm.
It was Easter or July 4th, and they pretend to be great grandpa, and they would pretend to be this, and we would just she would act out how I'm Professor Nelson McCall, and I am a professor, and I was born in 1867, and I am a principal of a school in South Carolina. I am Uncle Robert McCall, and I did this. I'm Claudius. I was a publisher in South Carolina by the 1880s
Mm-hmm.
and a dean of a school and opened up these things. And I am so and so, and I am Rhonda Reed Winston, who's still living. And I was appointed to the federal courts by President uh, Clinton. We would do these things. It sounds boring. It really does sound boring. It was always front and center in there. I was fortunate all the time. I'm not taking their credit for this. Those same kids are now attorneys,
Mm-hmm.
teachers, accountant, business owners. So we shared it with intention to make sure they knew who they were because that's who you are. I believe the Bible when it says, you write the vision, make it plain. As a man thinking, so shall he become. When you believe those words, you say, well, if my child or and my child is in the African sense, is our village. It's not just my kids. It's your kids, all our kids together. So I'm going to make sure that our kids know who they are. So they go to school, they're not concerned about this or that. I don't care what they see on the radio or TV. They know who they are at all times.
Mm-hmm.
And so you will see that. And that's how you use that work to do that. We did museums. I remember last year we had a museum thing, and on Friday night, I'm going to do a museum. And people said, Spencer, you don't have to do it for an hour because they were trying to be nice. In their minds, they were thinking, no one's going to want to come to a boring museum at the library on a Friday night. They were trying to keep my feelings from being hurt, and they didn't realize I can't my feelings. And so we
Exactly.
get to the library, and I had this museum up with our family, pictures of your family and you all on there, and this and that, and this person was in World War I, and they came back home after they're thinking Americans will now know we are patriotic, and instead they had the worst lynching someone ever. And so who was there and looking at all these things for the college kids and the high school kids? Like, wow,
Mm-hmm.
that's my grandfather right there. That's my great grandfather. And they didn't want to leave the museum until they would leave because the library was closing down. So that's how we do that with our kids.
One final question. If someone was to start documenting their own family heritage, what advice would you personally give them?
So I'll give them several layers of advice. One, start now. Because what will happen is you're going to say, oh my gosh, Aunt so and so just died. I wish I had asked her this. And then go with questions that you already asked them, like where they come from, how far back do you remember? But then also ask them, what should I know that I might not know to ask? Because what you will find out is there's a lot of things people assume you know until they're dead. Like, I wish I'd known that. And then, of
Mm-hmm.
course, go to the library or go online to ancestry.com, or you can go to familychurch.com and just begin to look back with your family. So find your grandparents' names and where they were born, and then start looking backwards to find out how far, do you go or can you go, and then work forward. And that's what I would suggest people do. But just start now. And there's always people to help. You can find if you're I don't care what color you are. Actually, I'll tell you the people all the time. When I got started in this, the people who were most of helpful to me were white. And I'm not saying, and I mean, honestly, they would show me everything they could find on how to do stuff and also where they could find resources. But you can find either white historians in your area or black ones who are genealogists to assist you in the process. Just start now. You cannot mess up.
Mm-hmm. Privilege, 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 and an honor having you on today, Spencer. Talk
Thank
about,
you.
our roots and our family history. This section of the podcast is where I do like a rapid fire of things. You just give me your best option or answer within within a minute. All right?
Great. Okay.
All right. You ready?
Yes.
Who who's your favorite person that you searched for in history?
I'm gonna say Josiah Glover.
And who's that? I'm sorry, because I don't
So
know.
that's my fourth great grandfather. He was a free man, a free black man, and he got into a fight with a white business partner. This is before slavery ended, and beat him up, and didn't go to jail.
Mm. Do you like to
And I'm not saying that's right. I'm just showing that that
correct?
was against the times of that time frame. You know, he'd been killed or lynched. Yeah.
Correct. Your best family story you have ever heard.
Ooh, best family. It's a story. I'll tell you this, and it involves somebody that you knew, not them. They were telling me the story, and so we discussed this person earlier. And they were at my cousin Doris's house. They were in town for a reunion, and these two older women had a discussion about who was the oldest. And so they were fussing, and one of them said, "I'll tell you, your great grandma said to the other one, you know, you're older than me because you had me out there watching the mule, holding the mule, and on the lookout in the field while you was had with that man over there in the grass rolling around."
Your favorite family recipe.
Oh, family recipe. Oh, that's a hard one right there. I guess I'm going to say Moravian sugar bread. Moravian sugar bread.
An old family photo or document that blew your mind.
Mm. Okay, so one of my mother's ancestors in 1798 in North Carolina, he was dying. He wrote his will, and he left his entire estate, all of his property, to his mulatto free woman of color mistress and their 4 children. And that's recorded in the archive. It's in the courthouse of Chatham County, North Carolina.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
and our family has that land still has, our family has that land still now.
Wow. That's insane.
Yeah, so that was from 1798 to now. We still have that property.
Wow. A family member that you wish you could interview in the past.
My great grandfather Nelson McCall, because he was a historian also. He got divorced from his wife, and there's a story there because that wasn't very common at that time. And he also was big on history and preserving history.
And last one word to describe our family.
Industrious.
Okay.
Industrious.
Okay, Spencer, it's a privilege
No,
to honor
it's my
having you.
it's my privilege to be on this. Thank you so much. It's my privilege.
Spencer, thank you for sharing the story from your heart and your journey with us today. You remind us that family isn't just about where we're going, but also about where we've been. And because of your work that you have done, these stories and legacy will forever live on for future generations.
Yes, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we here thank you, Spencer McCall, for joining the CA Media Podcast, the show that allows you to come in your own unique way. Spencer, do you have any like social media or ways that people can reach out to you?
Yeah, I'm Winston McCall on Facebook. I can find me there. I'm sorry, McCall Winston, McColl Winston. If I have any questions about research, just send me a message and I will gladly help you or send people to you in your area. I know people all over the country that do this kind of work and they don't mind sharing their insight. That's McCall, McColl Winston is my account on Facebook. Of course, or to my cousin one. They can just take he has my email too and all that kind of stuff.
All right, all right, Spencer, it's a privilege again having you on. Take care. God bless. And we'll talk.
Thank you so much, cousin. Take care.
All right, take
Thanks
care.
again.
You're welcome.
Was okay? Everything okay? Awesome. Thanks again.
Of course. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the CA Media Podcast, the show that allows you to come in your own unique way. I am the host, Clyde Anderson. Want to be a guest on the show? Got questions, feedback, or a story you'd like to share? We'd love to hear from you. Email us at camediapodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on all platforms at CA Media Podcast. Listen and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and wherever you stream your podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a review. It helps us grow and keep bringing the conversations that matters. Until next time, stay connected, stay inspired, and always remember, We are the show that allows you to come in your own unique way.